The bullet that went into my son's head missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. Yeah, he was shot, he was wounded, but he survived. The bullet that shot me in my left leg missed my right leg, which enabled me to drive my automatic car to get to that ambulance.
This is really neat. This is a synagogue that was built here in Ancient Shiloh, and it's a modern town now. And when they returned here, the Jewish people, to settle in 1978, they built the synagogue, and they list in Genesis 49, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, the scepter from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and his shall be an assemblage of nations." And so Shiloh is more than just a city, a town in Samaria. It's also a reference to the Mashiach, the Messiah. And then they also, in Joshua 18, talked about the whole congregation of children of Israel assembling here and erecting the tent of meeting. That's the whole point of the tabernacle. The tent of meeting, or the Mishkan, was a place where God can interact with man. And that's the whole point of us being here, is for fellowship, for knowing God and loving him and walking with him. And the tabernacle is a beautiful picture of that and of the Messiah. It has been, what, a few weeks since I met you? Yes. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay, welcome to Shiloh. Shiloh is the first capital of ancient Israel in the time of Joshua. Joshua, the successor of Moses. He came to Shiloh, brought everyone to Shiloh. Why Shiloh? Because Shiloh was the central area of the tribe of Ephraim, land of Ephraim. This is the biblical portion of Ephraim, and Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim. And it's also centrally located in the biblical heartland of Israel, and it's there was running water. We have the Shiloh Creek, which in the summertime now is a dried riverbed, but in the winter it has running water. And Shiloh was also a walled city, which at that time provided protection, which was needed. So Joshua stood here, he spoke to the Israelites, 7 tribes that had not yet received their inheritance in the land. And he said to them, "How long will you wait before coming to take possession of the land that the Lord God of your fathers has given you?" Those words which he said here in Shiloh were given for all time. So it wasn't just him speaking to the tribes, because prophecy that is given out, what is recorded, is intended for all times. So that was the intention, and today we have that struggle over the land of Israel, where the whole world talks about the Israeli-occupied West Bank. And, well, you can't occupy something that God gave you. Occupied implies something illegal. God gave it to us. We have an obligation to take care of it and to rebuild it.
I agree.
Okay, so let's quickly run through the history. We only have a few minutes. I'm going to give you a quick history of Israel in 3 minutes. Okay, so I know that's hard to do with our people because we've been doing this for thousands of years, but I'm going to try. Shiloh, 369 years in Shiloh. The tabernacle stood here, the tabernacle, the precursor of the Holy Temple, and it was here. This was the center. The Israelites would come here 3 times a year. Near the end of those 369 years, a woman named Hannah comes to Shiloh to pray for a son. The son who was born from her prayers is Samuel. Samuel grows up into prophecy in Shiloh. She brings him back to Shiloh. By the way, Shiloh is Shiloh, just in case you don't know. Okay, same place.
Shiloh is Shiloh, actually.
That's true, that's true. We go by the proper Hebrew pronunciation.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so she brings him back to Shiloh, and he serves with the high priest Eli in the tabernacle. And he grows up into the teenage years, into adulthood, and into prophecy, serving God in the tabernacle. Now, you have to understand, this was occurring simultaneously with the people of Israel growing up. In the desert, we were like little children. God did everything for us. When we were hungry, he gave us the manna from heaven. When we needed a place to live, he provided us with these tents that we could take from place to place. Even the tabernacle would be folded up and taken from place to place and carried with these two poles on the side, which you see here on the Holy Ark. That symbolizes that as well. He took care of us with everything. Even when we had to fight a war against the Amalekites, they raised Moses' hands in the air, and the battle is won. Then we come into the land of Israel. 14 years after the entry into the land, Joshua establishes the tabernacle in Shiloh, and we're suddenly like teenagers. God says, okay, Joshua speaks to the tribes, the heads of the tribes, and he says, go out there and take possession of the land. How long are you going to wait before coming to take possession of the land? You know, it's like with the teenager. You say, how long are you going to wait to go wash those dishes? You ate already. We had to learn to be adults. That was the whole Shiloh period, learning to be adults, learning to plant in order to have food to eat, learning to hunt in order to have food to eat, learning to build our own homes, learning to build a place of worship with stone walls, foundations in the ground, unlike the portable tabernacle. That was Shiloh. Now, jumping ahead, Samuel the prophet, after Shiloh is destroyed, he goes on to appoint the first two kings of Israel, Saul and David. David establishes a unified kingdom in Jerusalem with a space in Jerusalem. His son Solomon builds the holy temple, and the temple is destroyed several hundred years later by Israel's enemies. Then they come back from Babylon and they rebuild the holy temple. And several hundred years later, it's destroyed by the Romans. The Romans changed the name of the land to Palestina, giving it a Roman derivative of the word Philistines, which was another one of Israel's enemies. It's kind of akin to, if God forbid, Al-Qaeda would destroy the United States of America, would drive all the Americans out and change the name of it to ISIS. Very similar conceptually. So the name Palestina was adopted by the world. It stuck for 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years. And until the 1960s, the only people who were called Palestinians were Jews. My father-in-law, who was at least 10 generations in the land of Israel. So for almost 2,000 years, the land was called Palestina, or Palestine. They dropped their last syllable. And in the 1960s, after 1948, when the state of Israel was reestablished and the Israelites were coming back into the land and the land was giving of its fruit again, exactly as prophesied in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 36, prophecy was coming to life here. And then 1960s, the Palestinians came to life. They invented a people. It was basically the Arabs of the land of Israel who were they started calling themselves Palestinians because they wanted a national indigenous nation identity, even though the only indigenous nation here that there ever was the Jewish people.
Correct.
But so they invented the Palestine Liberation Organization and they started fighting against Israel. 1967 comes. All the Arab nations attack Israel. In those 6 days of war, Israel recaptured Judea, which is the region south of Jerusalem, Samaria, where we are now, in the region north of Jerusalem, eastern Jerusalem, where the two holy temples once stood, the Golan Heights, the Sinai Desert, the Gaza Strip. All of this happened in 6 days, and on the 7th day we rested. Okay, this is a God thing here. This is not something that is according to the rules of men. This is a God thing, and we have to understand that. But did the nation of Israel stand up and say, "This is my God"? Well, some did, but many just said, "We have a great army." We do have a great army, but we have an army that is God's army in the land of Israel. And in 1993, Israel's political leadership misguidedly signed the Oslo peace accords, giving at least a hint of the possibility of having a Palestinian Arab state in the biblical heartland of Israel, in Judea and Samaria, and possibly parts of Jerusalem, which they had always been demanding. Well, what was the result of those peace accords? The worst waves of terrorism that Israel has ever experienced. This happened from 1993 all the way up to the present. The terrorism against Israeli civilians has been especially intense in the biblical heartland of Israel, in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, more than any place else, but of course it has affected the whole country. I myself have experienced it in my community here. If you go out from my house, you take a walk down the street, you come to the first house on the corner, and you come to a family whose 16-year-old son was killed in a terror attack. The very next house after that, they lost their 19-year-old granddaughter who was killed in a bombing at a bus stop. 3 houses further down that street, and you come to another family whose 17-year-old son was shot and killed by terrorists that infiltrated the community where his high school was. Then you go around the corner from there, and another family you meet had a 5-month-old baby who was killed when terrorists were shooting at the car as the parents were coming home from a visit to the grandparents' house. Those are only a few of the stories. There are many others. I myself, one day I was coming back from Jerusalem. I had my 3-year-old son buckled behind me in the toddler seat. And halfway home, back to Shiloh, the car is ambushed with a massive hail of bullets on the car. The car went completely dead when the bullets hit. And I felt a bullet crash into my left leg. Blood started flying everywhere. I turned around to my son to see if he was okay. And he was just staring straight ahead. His eyes were wide open. His mouth was wide open. He looked like he was trying to scream or cry, but no sounds were coming out. I figured he was just in shock. I quickly tried to start the car, turned the ignition. I shifted gears, turning the ignition each time. The car was dead, completely dead. And I know how to start a car on a cold winter day. I'm originally from the United States. I lived in New York. I know how to start a car. The car was not starting, it was dead. And after trying a few more times, suddenly the car started. And it started as if it had never had a problem starting before. I hit the gas and I drove that car as fast as I could to get away from the terrorists as the blood is pouring out of my leg. And I'm trying to reach security forces. I couldn't get to them on my CB radio that we had at that time. And finally, I get up to the next community up the road, which is called Ofra. I pull up to the gate. I start screaming for an ambulance. And the guard at the gate didn't seem to hear me. I started shouting even louder. And everyone who heard came within, came running to the car. The gas station attendant across the street came up to the car. He said, "I'm a paramedic." And he wrapped up my leg. He ripped off my shirt. He wrapped up my leg with my shirt to stop the blood flow. And he said, "Here, call your wife." I called my wife. I told her I've been shot in the leg. Hopefully I'll be getting to the hospital if an ambulance comes. and our son is okay. He's just in shock. And a few minutes later, an ambulance does pull up. 2 paramedics leap out of the ambulance. They run up to the car. They pull my son out of the baby seat, and they start shouting, and they cradle him in one of them cradles him in his arms, and he shouts out to the driver in the ambulance, "He's also been shot. He's been shot in the head. Please call the hospital." They wrapped his head with bandages. They put an oxygen mask on his face, put both of us on stretchers, and took us into the ambulance, into the hospital in Jerusalem, where I was pronounced the 1,000th victim of terrorism to be hospitalized in that hospital just in that previous year and a half. Well, I didn't quite know what I was supposed to do with all that information, and the head of public relations told me, "I'm telling you that you are the 1,000th victim because I want you to know that the media is massed outside this emergency room. They want to interview the 1,000th victim of terrorism and photograph you and your son." I thought for a moment of all the terror victims, of all the children who had lost their lives. I thought of a good friend of mine who had just been killed in a terror attack a few weeks before that. And I said, "You know what? You bring them in here. I have what to say to them." And I've been telling this story ever since. I tell this story because, not just because of our trauma and the need to vent, and not because of any political message that I may have, and I do have my opinions, but I tell the story because it's a story of miracles. And someone who's been through trauma has an obligation to share the miracles, if there are miracles. And in this case, there certainly were. The bullet that went into my son's head missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. Yeah, he was shot, he was wounded badly, but he survived. The bullet that shot me in my left leg missed my right leg, which enabled me to drive, even though the terrorists were shooting from the right side, which enabled me to drive my automatic car to get to that ambulance. On the 5th day in the hospital, I get a call from the car mechanic. He says, David, I just want you to know we have the car. We started ordering parts. There are 49 bullet holes in the car. It's going to be very difficult to fix, but we're going to try. And I said, I don't care about the car. The car's not important to me anymore. He said, I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I have to ask you a question. And there was silence on the other end of the phone for a few seconds. And then he said, why can't we start that car? And a chill went down my back because I know that the car was dead when the bullets hit, and I couldn't get it to start. And I tried, and I shifted gears, and I turned the ignition. I did everything I could. I couldn't get it to start. And then suddenly it started, as if it had never had a problem starting before, and I drove 170 kilometers an hour, that's 110 miles an hour, to get to that ambulance. And because of that, our lives were saved. And I've been telling the story ever since. And some good has come out of it, because after we saw our son's trauma several weeks later, after 2 operations, and he was suffering from psychological, emotional trauma, I realized that something had to be done with this. And people started coming to me and asking me the story. They wanted to hear the story of what happened. And I said, this is not just a story. Something has to be done with it and turned into good. The evil of the terrorists has to be turned into good. And I started having this vision of a therapeutic, educational campus where we could combine, somehow blend therapy with education to heal the trauma of the terror victim children. And that's when I decided to start what would eventually become the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, for the purpose of healing the trauma of terrorism and restoring the lives of these children, restoring some of the lost innocence to their lives. And we now have over 2,000 children who we work with every day most of those children, except for the ones who are in the formal therapy, we have formal therapy, informal therapy. Except for the ones who are in formal therapy, all the children think that they are just coming to school. But as you will see in a moment, they are being given something that is not being given to children in most places in the world. And we've created it for such a time like this, when it's needed. We take the Torah scrolls out of this holy ark. By the way, it says on top, Torat Hashem Tamima Meshivat Nafesh, which means that God's Torah, God's complete Torah, nourishes the soul. So we take the holy arks out. We have a procession around the synagogue, and eventually one Torah is put on this table up here. And we read, we open it up, and someone reads from the Torah, actually sings from the Torah. We have a special cantillation that he reads to, and everyone listens. And then it's rolled up, raise it in the air, as Moses did. Then we put it away in the ark, and we complete the worship. The children in the school here learn in the same way. So we're soon going to go into a Bible lesson, spend about 5 minutes in a Bible lesson, and you will hear the children, you will see the children learning Torah, reading from the Bible in the special way that they do.
When it comes to trauma, you obviously experienced trauma, not only of the whole incident, the pain of getting wounded, but probably the bigger trauma was to discover that your son had been hit.
That's true.
So how do you handle that? And then when these children are receiving therapy and they're getting healed, does that healing help the parents that have experienced the trauma as well? Is your part in healing the children actually helping the parents as well?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, first of all, in my particular case, I've been telling the story ever since of what happened to us and what we've done with it. So for me, I believe that I have had that catharsis and it was never buried. The trauma was never buried. In children, it's buried, usually. And that's why therapy is so important. That's why it's so critical for them. And I'm going to talk more about it after when we get to the formal therapy center, but we have whole family therapy now that something that we have started recently. We have always required the families to be involved. A lot of people, a lot of times I'll speak in a church, and then if we have Q&A, so someone stands up and says, I want to come visit your orphanage. Well, we're not an orphanage. And actually, we don't believe in orphanages, except in the most extreme cases where there's no other possibility. But we believe in families, we believe in faith, and we're family and faith-based operation. And the parents, or if both parents have been killed in terror attacks, and we do have many cases like that, the guardians are absolutely required to be involved in the therapeutic process. They have to come in for their own session once a month with the therapist. And as I said, sometimes we have whole family therapy as well.
That's amazing.
When I started the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, at that time I had 25 years experience as a school teacher. I had no idea what I was going to do with this. God was giving me this vision, and I didn't know. didn't know what I was going to do with it. I didn't know how. How does one start something like this? How does one start a nonprofit operation? And I had no funds. I just had the vision. So I said, okay, I'm going to go meet with some of the leaders in the community. And at that time, I wasn't mayor anymore, so I met with the mayor, I met with a couple of other leaders, and they said, go speak to Sippy. So I said, who's Sippy? I said, Sippy is a woman's name. She started this 2-room therapy center. Happens to be right down there. This little tiny part of this building was a 2-room therapy center. And she had started doing physical and occupational therapy with children, 2 days a week. So I arranged to meet with her. I sit down with her. She greets me with a big smile. And I start explaining to her what I just explained to you, that we have no funds. We just have this vision and a miraculous story to share with people, and hoping that we can turn this into something good. So the whole time that I'm sitting there and telling her about the terror attacks and everything, which she knew herself from personal experience, she's smiling the whole time. I said, Sippy, why are you smiling? I'm telling you this terrible story about the terrorism and what I'm trying to do with it. And she said, I'm smiling because I've been expecting you. And she pulls open a drawer, takes out a booklet that she had prepared. It looked like one of these little scrapbooks that the children like to put together. And she turns the page. First page, music therapy, pictures and rationale, why it works, why it's effective. Second page, art therapy, why it works, why it's effective. Horseback riding therapy, animal-assisted therapy, sports therapy, a whole booklet. I said, okay. I said, let's get started. I have no money, but we've got to expand this therapy center and turn it into something that will meet the psychological post-trauma of all these children. Because we have a whole generation that's been scarred by the terrorists. So now we have a nice-sized therapy center, which on a busy day is very full, and it's worked. It's worked. We have the therapists and the educators and the families. Everyone is working together. And I've written 7 books since then, including God, Israel, and Shiloh, Returning to the Land, which was the first. And other books, Islamic Tsunami, Israel and America in the Age of Obama, Trump and the Jews, and the most recent one, Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel, which has been turned into a documentary film. So all of this is part of the same goal, though, to rebuild the biblical heartland in fulfillment of prophecy, to heal the trauma of the terror victim children, and to rebuild according to God's plan.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed our program on YouTube. We want to continue to provide you some great videos on God, the Bible, and how it all connects with our world. It would really help us if you would consider subscribing to the InGrace YouTube channel. We would also like to have you comment. We will try to read and respond to them. And we also need you to hit the notification button and like the InGrace episode that you just saw. These ways will help more people hear about InGrace and more people hear the gospel of grace.